Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Advanced Topics in Ethnography. So I thought this would be a good time to sort of take a pause and talk about where we've come from and now where we're going. So if you recall, a couple of weeks ago, I believe, I said that the beginning of the semester was more related to definitions, the ethics. What is ethnography? Why would you choose ethnography as it relates to a particular health phenomena that's going on? And we've been sort of observing what ethnographies are, both through the reading of your long book that you chose and also some mini ethnographies along the way. Now we're definitely in that phase where we're getting into the doing of ethnography, and this week especially the different parts that go into doing an ethnography. Of course, in this semester you're not doing one, but the next four chapters I have you reading, 32 through 35 in the textbook, are taking you through the ropes, as it were. Think about it that way, and transitioning from raw data to analysis. Now, I think everyone in this class has a different experience with doing research. And some of you may have been more introduced to quantitative type research before you were introduced to qualitative research. But as you'll see in these chapters, it's making that move, which is, there are really a lot of different techniques. And remember, ethnography is equated with storytelling. And you're going to have some instances in these chapters where they're going to show you how you would write uh, a case, for instance, but then how that case can be retold in a way that is much more like a story. And you had some practice a couple weeks ago in writing a little bit about your topic, or the proposed topic that you might be interested in doing one day after this course, or maybe even for your dissertation. And the richer and the more eloquent that you can tell the story that's based in real data, that's what we're really striving for in ethnography. We want to tell the story in a different way. So details, either about individuals or their context environment, the conditions that are going on at the time. It might be a unique episode, and like the COVID pandemic, for instance, was an episode in life where the story of residents preparing to be doctors was totally, put on its head because the conditions were so different under, versus other times when we weren't in a pandemic. There's just one example. But now we're going to make that shift. So that's what that chapter 32 is about. Getting into this idea of reasoning, and reasonings, and what's going on under the skin of what you're observing, and making meaning out of that sort of data, and starting to think more on the level of not just what is going on, but what's the meaning of what's going on, whatever it is that you're looking at. And then chapter 33, of course, is going to introduce you to something you may already be familiar with, or maybe not. And that's computer-assisted qualitative data analysis. Some of you may be familiar with some of these. Once in my life, I trained on Atlas TI, but then I moved over to NVivo because I just felt it was more user-friendly. You may have never experienced any computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software. This might be your first introduction to it. But if you're going to do anything in the qualitative line of analysis, ethnography, any type of naturalistic methodology, um, uh, uh, phenomenology, ethnography, even a case study, or even if you're just doing plain interviews as part of a mixed method study, you're going to be using one of these uh, uh, software packages. If you've never, you know, never experienced it, never heard of it, I recommend just going online, Googling a particular product, the ones that are mentioned in the chapter, the most popular ones. And you could always watch a tutorial, or, they probably all have some sort of video you can watch where they explain the product. I'll just get you into the modality of thinking about how you would use that sort of software when you have collected data. And by the way, I can speak specifically to NVivo. NVivo is great because you can do qualitative analysis on both language, but then also video, stills, that sort of thing. So it's really like very multimedia. So if you were doing an ethnography, you very well and most probably will be using a combination of visual or performative um, uh, uh, data points along with linguistic data points. So I'm just throwing that out there. I am biased because NVivo is what I use, but that's what that chapter is going to be introducing you to. And then we'll get a little deeper into the analytics of what you do with all of this. And then the idea of ethnography as what I've been saying all along, I call it storytelling. This author, Radina, likes the word creative nonfiction. And this is a really interesting chapter because you sort of get all the info about lymphedema, but then she gives you a little appendix to the chapter where it's written like an ethnography would be written, which should give you a flavor of what the type of writing is that's associated with ethnographic work. This is nonfiction. It's not fiction. It is based on real data and the analysis of real data. So I think you're going to like that chapter the most, because it actually, you can start to see that transition from collecting data, analyzing data, to the craft of writing it up in a way that really reads like a story. And I don't think so far in the textbook that we're using, you really have had a panoramic view of how you go from you know, one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is how the story looks near the end. Okay. There really is not an assignment due this week, but I'm asking you to, start to identify the main types of analysis that you might be using uh, in your sort of mock proposal research that we've been working on throughout the semester, and think about how these techniques might be specific to your context. So this is where we go back to what are the conditions? So let me just throw some things out there. If you were telling the story of surgical teams, okay? That's a very specific context, and the conditions are very unique in that they are definitely closed situations. You, as an observer, might be sitting in a corner of the room. You might even be taking video. You definitely would, I would imagine, be recording conversations between different people in the surgical theater, etc. That's going to be very different from if you do a more sort of like public health project. that brings you out into the field that is more public. It might involve people going to a community center for health assistance, where you have a much more uncontrolled environment. So think about what you might want to do in that proposal that we have been putting together, and really give some serious thought as to what might the conditions be that I meet up with. A couple of you are interested in uh, um, topics that are very culturally embedded, and you have, those of you who have chosen them are very familiar with the culture. Um, Most people would probably not be as familiar with some of the things that you would encounter for instance, in Africa, different parts of Africa. And you would know best what types of data collection and analyses that you might need to deal with in your project. Other things that fall into these conditions are things like situations where people don't want to be recorded, they don't want to be identified, yet you've chosen an ethnographic process. So you might not have the opportunity to do things like video recording. Or you might have a problem with IRB even, because that's a sticky subject with IRBs, is why do you need to video record? But if you're doing anything that's performative, where really what you're studying is the meaning of what people do and how they do it, that might be another part of the your toolbox, think of it that way, that you would use for doing this sort of research. So, like I said, we're in this portion of the semester now where we're going from, you've learned all the sort of parts, and now we're going to watch how those parts transition themselves from data to analysis to ultimately what will become the story that you're writing. Okay. Um, uh, I'm going to open up session 10, if I haven't already. I don't think I did. No, it's open already. So, share your musings about what you think would be appropriate for your study that you're proposing to do. It might be good if everyone just, gave a reminder to the rest of the class what they're working on, and what sort of data analyses, artifacts, conditions do you need to consider when you're shaping meaning, and ultimately how this story is going to be told. I want to remind everyone that we have on Saturday uh, our check-in, our Zoom check-in. I sent a calendar invite to everyone. It is not mandatory, but what I'd like to do, for those of you who will be logging in, is to spend some time on what we're doing this week specifically. And of course, any other questions you have. But at this point of the semester, how do you imagine getting from the idea of doing an ethnography to the different parts of, you know, the topic that you are working on, to the narrative and other types of analyses that you might need to do, and ultimately how that might be reflected in the writing technique that you would need to utilize moving forward. I think that'd be a great opportunity to sort of pull all those pieces together for our session on Saturday. I hope everyone has a great week. I'm still catching up on the discussion boards for this week because I just got back yesterday from New York. So I'll be looking at those this afternoon, and I hope you all have a great week and look forward to seeing you all on Saturday. Bye-bye.